There's a very specific kind of humiliation that doesn't hit you all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly over time, until one day you realize it's been happening right in front of you for years, and you were the only one who didn't understand it. In my case, it wasn't strangers, it wasn't coworkers, it wasn't even bad luck in relationships. It was my own family. More specifically, it was my older brother, and the strange, almost unbelievable pattern that followed him everywhere he went. I didn't notice it at first, or maybe I just didn't want to. Because the truth is, when something like this starts happening once, you can brush it off. Twice, still a coincidence. But when it keeps repeating over and over again, with different people, different situations, and always the same ending, at some point you have to stop lying to yourself. You have to admit that something is wrong. And for me, that realization didn't come during some dramatic argument or big confrontation. It came during a completely normal family Thanksgiving, the kind we had every single year, where everything looks perfect on the outside, until you start paying attention to what's actually happening underneath. I remember standing in the kitchen that day, pretending to help with plates while my attention kept drifting back to the living room. From a distance, everything looked harmless. People laughing, conversations overlapping, the usual noise of a crowded house. But I wasn't watching everyone. I was watching one specific moment unfold, the kind of moment I had seen too many times before. The girl I had brought with me, someone I genuinely cared about, someone I had been with long enough to think maybe this time would be different, was sitting on the couch, and my brother was next to her. Not too close, not in a way anyone could call out, just close enough. Talking, smiling, leaning in just a little, the way he always did, and she was responding exactly the way they all did. At first, it's small things. A little more eye contact than usual, laughing just a second too long, turning her body slightly toward him without even realizing it. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd miss it completely. But I knew. I always knew. Because by that point, I had already seen how this story ended, more times than I could count. The worst part wasn't even what he was doing. It was how normal everyone treated it. My parents were in the same room. My aunt was literally sitting across from them. People could see it, or at least pieces of it, but no one ever said anything. No one ever stepped in. And if I reacted, if I showed even the slightest discomfort, I was the problem. I was overthinking. I was being insecure. That's what they always said. It didn't matter that the same thing had happened before, again and again with different girls I had dated. It didn't matter that every single one of those relationships followed the exact same pattern. Everything fine at first, then distance, then confusion, and eventually, them. Together. Or at least closer than they ever should have been. Somehow it always circled back to me being the issue, like this was some kind of normal dynamic I was supposed to accept. By the time that Thanksgiving came around, I wasn't even nervous anymore. Not in the way you'd expect. It was worse than that. It was this quiet, heavy feeling in the back of my mind, like I already knew what was going to happen and I was just waiting for it to play out again. Still, I told myself this time might be different. I had said that before, of course. Every time, actually. But this time felt more serious. I'd been seeing her for months. It wasn't casual. I had taken my time, kept my distance from family events on purpose, avoided putting her in that situation too early. And when she finally asked to meet them, I hesitated longer than I want to admit. I even tried to explain it, carefully, vaguely, without sounding crazy. I told her my family could be a bit much, that my brother had a strong personality, that things sometimes got weird. She laughed it off. Most people do. Because unless you've seen it yourself, it sounds ridiculous, like some insecure guy making excuses. So I brought her anyway. And standing there in the kitchen, watching history repeat itself in real time, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't coincidence. And it definitely wasn't in my head. Something was wrong. And the worst part? I still didn't know how far it went, or how it was going to end. There was a time when I genuinely believed it was just bad luck. That maybe I had a terrible taste in people, or that I moved too fast, or maybe I just didn't know how to keep someone interested. That's what everyone kept implying anyway. It's easy to believe something is your fault when every single person around you keeps reinforcing that idea. But the thing about patterns is, they don't lie, and mine was too consistent to ignore, even if I tried. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. The second time, I started noticing similarities. By the third and fourth, it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like a setup I didn't understand. Every relationship followed the same script. Things would start out normal, easy conversations, late-night calls, that feeling of finally connecting with someone who actually sees you. Then at some point, I'd bring them around my family. It could be a birthday, a random dinner, a holiday, it didn't matter. And that's when everything would shift. Not immediately, never immediately. That's what made it so hard to explain. It was subtle at first. A conversation that lasted a little longer. A joke that turned into inside humor. A look that lingered just a second more than it should have. And then, over time, almost like gravity, their attention would start pulling away from me and toward him. My brother had a way about him that made people comfortable almost instantly. He knew exactly what to say, when to say it, and more importantly, how to make someone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. I used to admire that about him. Growing up, he was the one everyone gravitated toward. Teachers loved him, friends followed him, even my own friends would end up liking him more after meeting him. Back then, it felt harmless. I was used to being in the background, but when it started happening in my relationships, it stopped being harmless very quickly. I remember one relationship in particular that really messed with my head. We had been together for almost 6 months, and for the first time, I actually thought this might go somewhere serious. She wasn't the type to be easily impressed, which I liked. She had her own opinions, her own boundaries. When I told her about my family, I kept it light, didn't go into details. I didn't want to sound paranoid. When she met my brother, everything seemed fine at first. They got along, but nothing stood out. I remember feeling relieved, like maybe I had been overthinking everything all along. But then, slowly, things started changing. She began mentioning him in casual conversations. At first, it was normal. Your brother's funny, or he gave me a good recommendation for something. But then it became more frequent, more specific. She'd bring up things they talked about that I wasn't part of. At one point, she casually mentioned something personal about his life that I didn't even know about. That's when the feeling came back, that quiet, sinking feeling that I had been here before. We didn't last much longer after that. Same ending, different version. Distance, confusion, then the inevitable separation. And just like before, eventually I found out they had stayed in touch. Not officially together, not in a way anyone could call out, but close enough to make everything feel pointless. After a while, I stopped bringing anyone around. It wasn't worth it. I kept my relationships separate from my family, built this invisible wall between those two parts of my life. And honestly, it worked. My relationships lasted longer. Things felt more stable. But it also meant living a kind of double life, constantly managing what I shared and what I didn't. It wasn't sustainable, and deep down, I knew that. Then I met someone who made me question that decision. It wasn't some dramatic, instant connection. It started quietly. We met through something completely unrelated to dating, just a random situation where we ended up talking longer than expected. There was nothing flashy about it, no intense first impression, but there was something else. Something steady, real. Conversations felt easy, not forced. Silence didn't feel awkward. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to perform or prove anything. We spent months getting to know each other before anything became official, and even then, I kept my guard up, not because of her, but because of everything that happened before. I hadn't told her the full story about my family, just small pieces, enough for her to understand the pattern, the discomfort, the reason I kept that distance. She didn't push, she just accepted it. But eventually, the topic came up again. A family holiday was coming up, and she asked if I was going. I hesitated, like I always did. She noticed, asked why. And this time, instead of brushing it off, I actually told her, not everything in one go, but enough for her to understand the pattern, the discomfort, the reason I kept that distance. She didn't react the way everyone else had. Dismiss it, laugh it off, tell me I was overthinking. She listened, really listened, and then she said something I wasn't expecting. Then let's go. At first I thought she didn't understand. I tried to explain again, more clearly this time, how it always ended the same way, how I didn't want to put her in that situation. But she just looked at me and said calmly, if what you're saying is true, then avoiding it isn't fixing anything. And if it's not true, then there's nothing to worry about. It was such a simple way of looking at it that it caught me off guard. So after going back and forth in my head for days, I agreed. The entire drive there, I had this constant tension sitting in my chest. Not panic, not fear exactly, just anticipation. Like I already knew how it was going to unfold, and I was just waiting for the first sign. She, on the other hand, seemed completely calm, talking normally, asking random questions, like this was just another day. When we got there, everything started the way it always did. Greetings, small talk, familiar faces, and then, eventually, the moment I had been waiting for, without wanting to admit it. My brother walked in, and just like that, the energy shifted. He saw us, smiled, came over, friendly, relaxed, exactly the way he always was. There was nothing obvious about it, no instant red flags. They met, exchanged a few words, it all looked normal. Too normal. For a while, nothing happened, and that almost made it worse, because it gave me hope, real hope. I started thinking maybe this time really was different. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe everything I believed about this pattern was just built on insecurity and coincidence. But then